You'll have to
No.
talk more about what that is.
Okay, so it's basically the good guy shows where you have your classic cars, your Camaros, Corvettes, etc. And they put together these swap meets. They do their show and shines of their cars, and so I don't know if it's just to NorCal or not, but my whole life, I mean, Good Guys was always kind of that go-to classic event at the local fairgrounds. It was huge. I mean, it's just hundreds of displays and cars and everything else out there. And it's in karting, we're so eager to move on to 2020. Here's the
Yeah,
new kart. Here's the new this. Here's the new that. And I don't think it's about living in the past. I think it's about recognizing it and
yeah,
learning from it. You know, and then you take it and say, okay, well, why did some of the things back then work really well? Let's learn from it. Um, I mean, everyone probably has their own answer to that question on how to fix it. But it just, again, it's just neat to see that
right,
this group is doing it. And again, they're doing something. That's the biggest, that
right,
was my, I guess, probably my point. They're doing something.
right. Somebody decided that they were going to stop looking to somebody else to do something and decided to do it themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Because, I mean, Facebook especially is littered with comments of people with great ideas, quote unquote, for other people to do, but ideas are kind of worthless. They
Yeah.
don't do anything, you
And
know?
I think a lot of us get caught in that trap. I definitely am. I run my mouth a lot, and I had to check myself a few times. Like, wait a second, I'm running my mouth on how they can fix it. Why can't I look at it as like how can I help them? You know
Right.
what can I do? What am I capable of doing that would be able to help them achieve what they're trying to do instead of saying, oh, you need to do this, you need to do that. You and I were hinting about that off mic a little bit of everyone's always telling other people, oh, this is how you should run an event. Oh, this is how you should do this. Oh, this is how you should do that. And at the end of the day, it's like, yeah, great idea. Would you like to do it, or how do we do it when we're already, understaffed or underfunded or under whatever?
Yeah, for sure. It's particularly hard for the clubs that, they don't have a lot of cash flow because there's not a lot of racers and or some racers have an expectation that, entry fees should be lower, which I mean, it depends on the track and the entry fee, of course, but I'm not sure if that's necessarily the case. I think some of the tracks get a little bit kind of taken for granted, in a lot of ways by racers, which is natural but not good, but you see a track there and you just assume it's gonna be there, and you pay your entry fee and that's it. But there's a whole lot more that goes on behind the scenes to actually make it a thing. So we were going to talk about the race to the bottom, right?
Yeah, with Davin's Facebook post.
Yeah, yeah. So David Sturdivant, kind of like my partner in crime at Kart Pulse, who was pretty much the host for our podcast too. He dropped a meme on his personal profile. How should we put it? Expressing his displeasure at people selling carts too cheap.
Stop selling
Um,
carts too cheap. Lowering the market value of used carts makes it harder for people to sell new carts too. No
hmm.
exclamation point. This
Yeah,
isn't to anyone in particular, but it's a trend in karting that drives my business mind crazy. Yeah, I was afraid to tackle this one, quite honestly,
we're going to
because
do it
you and
anyway, though.
there's not enough bandwidth out there for us to have this conversation. um, what side do you want to argue? I'll argue the other right side.
I'm not actually going to argue any side and just kind of piggyback on my usual kind of theory that none of these things are necessarily straightforward and cut. Especially when you say things are too expensive or things are not expensive enough, or it's all very relative and it's all open to interpretation. I think the important thing is that if we're looking to grow the sport as a group, as a community, as advocates or ambassadors of the sport, that we understand the different kinds of karting that are available, and I don't just mean classes. I mean whether it's playing around in your backyard in your own $200-300 go-kart to, run on CIK, WSK, or whatever, at, a higher budget. That when we're talking with somebody who expresses an interest in getting involved in go-karting experiences, that we listen to what they're saying and try and connect them with something that works well. And I think really what Davin was speaking to, and although maybe a little bit, I mean, part of it is like,
you think he's trying to sell his 2019 setup?
Maybe. I don't know. But he does have a point, and this is something that
I think it has a win and a couple of podiums this year, right?
Right, yeah. He's done. I think he finished second in his championship this year.
I think he did.
So he's been getting faster and faster each year. But I think the where was I? Lost my train of thought. The train's gone off the rails here and crashed. What was I meandering about?
Yeah.
What?
I knew that was going to happen.
Oh, see? All right.
Yeah. Am I supposed to get you back on track?
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Let's pick it apart.
I'm in the grass here. I kind of launched it over the curb.
Let's pick it apart a little bit. So stop selling karts too cheap. Lowering the market value of used karts makes it harder for people to sell new karts too. So let's look at it as, what do you think his point was on that?
I actually read it totally differently to what you said right now. So I guess I saw what I wanted to see, knowing Davin, versus what he actually posted. Because what you called out there, I'm like, well, boo-hoo. Like, it's up to the businesses to have a value proposition, right? That's really what it comes down to. And there's no control over the market of, how much karts go for. And also, outside of our little world of go-kart racing, there's like a massive market of what a go-kart means to everybody else in the world, outside our little, weird world where we race them.
Well, if someone wants to sell a kart that's too cheap, I'll buy it, and I'll sell it at fair market value.
Yeah, and, to talk about the conversation you and I had earlier, the price is one part of it, right? The concern is that if karts are too cheap, then the folks that you're attracting to the sport may not be able to afford it at a sustainable level for the sport, which means that clubs and tracks and businesses suffer because they're constantly on these tight margins.
Let me cut you off right there.
No.
Let's pinpoint it down the affordability of karting. Is it really a affordable hobby?
I don't think there's an answer to that.
Is it a cheap hobby?
I would say for most people, no. It's not a cheap hobby. No.
But
it's certainly not kart racing. Karting, a $200, $300 kart off Craigslist, and you've got some land and you want to rip around, that could be seen as inexpensive. But I think once you get into any kind of competitive karting, it gets more expensive. But as you and I spoke about, it's important to not mix up the value with the cost, right? And if you can't afford what it costs, then that's a different issue, And I think that's kind of where that concern comes from, is that there's a tendency to attract folks that may only be able to afford the cost, but they really don't understand and appreciate the value. And what by that I mean, they don't understand that the other options available to them for open-wheeled, wheel-to-wheel racing at a racing track with 20 other people are of order of magnitude more expensive than what they're looking at in karting. But they just see, four-figure bill, and they're like, oh, it's so expensive. And it's like, well, you're dealing with mechanical parts and engineering, so it's got to cost money. People got to be paid.
Yeah, and that's part of the person selling the equipment or the shop or the track, to also educate people on these are the expectations.
Right.
And NorCal Karters is trying to do a little bit better job at that. My ADD gets in the way. But having some sort of a roadmap, and hey, this is what you can expect, without getting into arguments of, well, I can get a $500 go-kart off Craigslist.
Yeah.
Yeah. Every once in a while, you run across that smoking deal where it was a $500 go-kart, it's ready to go race tomorrow, and it's going to be compliant and competitive.
Right.
But for the most part, when it comes to the racing side, that's not the normal story.
Right.
And And that's why it's always hard to kind of put that information out there, because you always get those guys that want to just argue, oh, that's way
Hmm.
too much. That's way too much. Like, well, these are the realistic numbers based on data and fact.
Right. I mean, and this happens a lot with racing and racers as well, is that we interject our own personal perspective on and try to assume and apply that to the entire market as a whole, um, which makes no sense because, as racers, we're ultimately competitive and looking for what's going to uniquely give us an advantage. We're kind of pre-programmed to do that. And that's great on an individual level, but not great on a broader level. So it's exactly what you said. It's about understanding and managing the expectation of the person buying that cart. If they buy a $300 cart, well, you're probably not going to be able to race it. If you buy a $600 shifter, chances are it may not hold together for very long. You definitely want to check out the brakes on it, things like that.
Absolutely.
But it's about connecting people with the right kind of karting at the right time that works for them. If it's a 14, 15-year-old that has a part-time job and their parents aren't paying for racing, then it's most likely going to be rental karting. That's what it's going to have to be for them until they're able to find a job that pays more or some other way to get into a different kind of kart racing. But I think a lot of what happens is, as racers, we have a tendency to kind of enforce our own opinions with good intentions, but kind of enforce our own opinions and our own personal experiences on somebody without actually asking them what they would like to do and listening to it, and then kind of figuring out what's going to work best for them, right? Somebody would say, great example, well, I was thinking of running 206, and somebody like, oh, don't do 206, it's stupid and it's too slow. And it's like, that's your opinion, but this other person may not really care about that, and most people don't, because there's something like 3,500 people running Briggs 206 right now. So I think that's a good example of, we've got our own kind of personal racer, especially some of the older guys that are a bit more, what's the word, masochistic, where we don't mind working on things all the time. The kind of,
Yeah,
if
that
you want
could
to call them the
spiral
new
off to a whole
customers.
different conversation.
Well, yeah, but what I'm
Yeah.
getting is that the market is, not in alignment with that, and we just need to accept it.
Yeah, I mean, it's for me, it's almost kind of a shock when you go to these big races. It's impressive when you show up to a SuperNats. You walk through the pits. I still get a little, awestruck. I haven't missed very many SuperNats over the past 20, 25 years. Um, and walking through the pits, it's still pretty impressive. And every year we're getting further and further away from, kind of the family oriented group working on their own kart and in racing, at that level. Now it's the big teams, the big tents, everything's catered, very expensive babysitting, drop the kid off, go meander outside of this tent, please. If you want to hang out in the tent, you're on that end in the catering area only. And you look around, you don't see a lot of the younger generations working on their stuff. But what's really refreshing is when you go back to a local track, and if someone has a trailer at all, that's a nice setup. But for the most part, it's people just barely managing to get their carts to the track, and you see a lot of the, dads fumbling with the wrenches, and the kids helping out, and it's that whole different experience.
Yeah.
But that segment has been shrinking, and I'm going to keep hammering on the Track Magic group until they prove me wrong. But they're just another avenue to expose karting to people, and what they're doing is great, because they're kind of forgotten, but they're taking the initiative to say, hey, you're not going to forget about us. We're still around, and we're still having a good time with this segment of karting. We're having a lot of fun doing this. And they're still going to the track. They're still paying their practice fees. They're still buying memberships to tracks. And yeah, we're getting sidetracked probably a little bit.
A little bit, just a tad.
Just a tad.
So, yeah, I mean, if we circle back to Davin's meme or meme, as you said, what is the point that we want to make? I mean, for